Members, I'd like to go ahead and call this session to order for the afternoon. Getting a bit of an early start, but we hopefully will mean that we can conclude earlier than we had planned. So for this session this afternoon, we are considering the Auditor General's report on the government's approach to sustainable economic development that was issued in November 2024. So I will, at this point in time, turn things over to the Auditor General for her to make an opening statement for us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to you, members of the committee, officials from the Ministry of Finance, my colleagues and listening public. Thank you for the opportunity to make some opening remarks. As you say, we are considering our report, The Government's Approach to Sustainable Economic Development, this afternoon, and that was published on the 21st of November 2024. Our audit covered five main areas: economic performance, the four key sectors of the economy, strategic direction, economic diversification, and finally risks to and challenges for the economy. It's worth noting that economic development needs a coordinated and joined up approach across government. No single ministry can achieve it alone. We therefore looked at the government's efforts to develop the economy sustainably. Our audit covered the 5 years 2018 to 2022, but we did include some 2023 data where they were available. I'll now briefly summarise our findings in each of the five areas. Firstly, I'll start with the economy's performance. As I'm sure we all know and are pleased to hear, Cayman Islands' economy is performing well, and it performed well consistently over the 5-year period from 2018 to 2022. However, and unsurprisingly, some economic indicators were affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. The economy also performed well when compared to the economies of Bermuda, Bahamas, the Caribbean region generally, and advanced economies including the United States. However, inflation and interest rates in the Cayman Islands are high, contributing to a high cost of living. Moving on to the four key sectors of the economy. The report focuses on those four sectors, namely financial services, business activities and administration, tourism, and construction and real estate. These four sectors between them contribute about 70% of GDP annually, generate around $2 billion in government revenues, employ half the workforce and around 10,000 Caymanians on average each year. Over the 5 years, 2018 to 2022, the government spent at least $1.2 billion supporting three sectors. This does not include the government's expenditure supporting business activities and administration sector because I could not find this data. The financial services sector is the largest contributor to the economy. It contributed the most to GDP and government revenues between 2018 and 2022. 2/3 of the financial services sector workforce are Caymanian. Business activities and administration sector is linked to the financial services sector but reported separately. It is the second highest contributor to GDP and just under half of the sector's workforce are Caymanian. Construction and real estate is the third highest contributor to GDP and the largest employer. About 2/5 of the sector's workforce are Caymanian. Tourism is the fourth sector and was most affected by the COVID-19 pandemic and is recovering well. The government does not measure or report the economic contribution from the tourism sector separately. However, considering the economic contribution from tourism-related sectors, the sector is the fourth largest by GDP contribution. It is the second biggest employer and around 2/5 of the workforce are Caymanians. The government also spends the most on this sector. Moving on to strategic direction for sustainable economic development, it is pleasing to note that successive governments highlighted economic growth as a priority in their strategic policy statements between 2018 and 2023. However, there is no overarching economic development strategy. Without an overarching strategy, the approach to economic development is not joined up, increasing the risk of conflicting strategies and activities and duplicated efforts across government. Responsibility for economic development is shared by different ministries. It is pleasing to note the responsible ministries have strategies for the tourism and financial services sectors. However, a strategy for the construction sector and an updated national development plan have yet to be developed. As I highlighted earlier, the construction sector is the economy's third largest and employs the highest number of people. Therefore, it is important to close those gaps in this sector's strategic direction. As part of our audit, we explored the government's approach to economic diversification. On a positive note, the government highlighted priorities for economic diversification in each strategic policy statement covered by my audit. In addition, there has been some progress in some government initiatives to diversify the economy, such as framework legislation for special economic zones. However, there is no strategy or plan setting out how the government's priorities for economic development will be achieved. Finally, we considered risks to and challenges for the economy. There are several risks to and challenges for the economy, but it is unclear how well the government has identified, assessed, or managed these risks and challenges. Some of the main risks and challenges to the economy are economic shocks, such as global economic slowdown or a COVID-19 pandemic level shock, maintaining responsible financial management, reduced spending power because of the high cost of living, and other economic development and other risks to economic development include pressure on infrastructure, including the road network, access to adequate public transport and internet connectivity, environmental issues such as waste management, inadequate demand for places in public and private schools, and access to affordable housing and healthcare. I am pleased to report the government appointed a Chief Risk Officer in February 2024. He is developing a new risk assessment framework for consistent adoption across the civil service during this current year. This will include quarterly internal risk assessments and an annual external risk assessment. The government has also formed a senior leadership risk committee comprising chief officers to provide ongoing oversight of the risks. These changes should help the government monitor and manage risks more effectively. I've made two recommendations to the government, one to the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development and one to the Ministry of Planning, Agriculture, Infrastructure, Transport and Development. So only 4 recommendations in the report. I have with me here today Miss Angela Cullen, who directed the work on this performance audit, and Mr. Desigan Favour, who worked on the team along with Jason Lee and Adrian Morenzi, who aren't here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Auditor General. Our first witness in this session is going to be Mr. Kenneth Jefferson, Financial Secretary and Chief Officer in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Jefferson. Before we begin, I'm going to make a very short preamble to this hearing this afternoon. Sustainable economic development is an important issue. And the Auditor General published a report about the government's approach to sustainable economic development on the 21st of November 2024. We note from the report that the economy is performing well, but the cost of living is high, something that Caymanians and residents alike will be aware of. As the Auditor General notes, sustainable economic needs a coordinated and joined-up approach across government. No single ministry can do this alone. We are keen to hear your views on how we can achieve a joined-up approach across the government. We also want to explore your ministry's role in economic development and diversification. The Auditor General made one recommendation to the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development, but it is unclear if it was accepted. Committee members may want to ask you about this and some other areas highlighted in the Auditor General's report. The first area and line of questioning deals with the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development's role in the economic development and diversification. And to lead that line of questioning, I'm going to call on Barbara Connolly. Ms. Connolly?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to our witness. Responsibility for economic development is currently shared by different ministries. For example, the Ministry of Tourism and Ports is responsible for the tourism sector, and the Ministry of Financial Services and Commerce is responsible for the financial services sector. However, your ministry has economic development in its title, but its role in economic development is unclear. The Auditor General noted that your ministry does not have any outputs about economic development in its budget statements. And my question to you, Mr. Jefferson, is what is the role of the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development in economic development and diversification?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to you and all honorable members of the committee. If you needed to hear my name again, it's Kenneth Jefferson. I'm the Chief Officer for the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development in this context, but I've also been the Chief Officer in the Ministry of Health since 7th of November 2024. But health is not obviously on the table now, so I'm here as the Chief Officer for the Ministry of Finance. Thank Member Connolly for her question, and we see the Ministry of Finance, although it does not, as she said, as the report says, it does not have economic development explicitly as a part of its outputs. We see it as more of coordination. The ministry should become involved in creating an overall economic development plan, Mr. Chairman, and we know that the Auditor General says that that area is lacking, and that is true. I'd just like to elaborate a bit on that to say that in the Ministry of Finance's strategic plan for the period of 2021 to 2025, we did have as one of our major priorities that we would develop an overarching, I think is how the Auditor General refers to it, as an overarching economic development plan for the government that encompassed the entire government. It took a while, Mr. Chairman. It took a while to get that going, and say thanks to the Economics and Statistics Office for reaching out to the Caribbean Development Bank, because it's beyond the capacity of the ESO itself to carry out such a massive plan. And the Ministry of Finance did actually put an approach to the development of an economic plan to the caucus. And that was in August 2024, Mr. Chairman. And so it wasn't actually a development plan itself. It wasn't the finished product. It was a statement essentially in the form of a cabinet paper to say this is how we would like to approach the development. And critical, an important element of that was the actual hiring of a consultant to help us do it. But the approach was basically saying, here's a list of areas that we want to cover. So it outlined the existing sectors of the economy, etc. It talked about the risk and so forth facing these existing sectors and the need to diversify the economy, etc. So it was an approach. And this was August 2024. And the decision of caucus was to defer it, to defer the plan or the approach that would eventually lead to a plan. We had included, Mr. Chairman, in our 24-25 budget, we had approximately $1.3 million to do the plan. So although, again, there might not have been an explicit output from finance that contained the words economic development, nonetheless, economic development was a part of our 24-25 budget. So it was 1.3 million that we had earmarked for it, and approximately 600,000 of it was for the consultant. It got deferred, and the decision was defer it until brought back from the caucus. So it never reached the cabinet level. And when we inquired about, well, what is the rationale, what is the thinking behind the deferral, since it's so important, right, to any government, the commentary was, well, it's perhaps a bit unfair for, you know, a government in 2024 with an election in 2025 to embark on agreeing to the plan when there's an election in April 2025, possibly a new government coming in. They may not agree with the approach. So defer it and bring it back essentially after the election is concluded. So that's its present position. So, Mr. Chairman, to double back to Member Conley's question, so we see the Minister of Finance as the coordinating agency to bring together, you know, a plan, and we all know that they do actually fit together, and there's a need for coordination. So, by way of simple example, if a particular ministry says, the Minister of Planning says we want to pursue technology as one of our new areas, we want to embark on that, then obviously there is a need for probably more people on island to do that, which puts pressure on your roads and so forth. And so they all need to dovetail together, and it needs to be, I believe, Mr. Chairman, that the timing is also really, really important in terms of when the plan is developed. And I believe that it's probably best to embark on such a thing, you know, at the beginning of a term. So if you're into year 3, it's probably unlikely that a government will want to embark on such a plan. So I think very early in the new term of a government is when it's best to start such a plan.
Thank you, Mr. Jefferson. My other question was whether you had plans to include outputs or outcomes for economic development in the ministry's future budget documents. But basically, you would need to have this overarching economic development plan in place in order to be able to include this in your future budget documents.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and through you to Member Conley. Yes, I mean, we would obviously have to include a budget for a continuation of the work in the 2-year cycle that starts 26 to 27. We would have to include in that budget the cost of undertaking a continuation of the plan. And yes, we could actually come up with an output naming that includes the words economic development as a part of our budget submission for 26 and 27. but it's probably maybe unlikely that much of the 1.3 million that we had may get used in 2025 to advance it. So it was something that would have to be requested again for the 26, 27 budget.
We're going to next focus on the overarching strategy for economic development. But FS, the successive governments highlighted economic growth as a priority in strategic policy statements for the 5-year period covered by the audit. As mentioned earlier, sustainable economic development needs a coordinated and joined-up approach across government. And we know that there is no overarching economic development strategy at this point. And the Auditor General noted that without an overarching strategy, the approach to economic development is not joined up, increasing the risk of conflicting strategies and activities and duplicated effort across the government. The Ministry of Finance and Economic Development's 2021 to 2025 strategic plan stated that it would create an economic development strategy, but has yet to do so. And you explained that just a few minutes ago. And as the chairman mentioned earlier, it is unclear if your ministry accepted the Auditor General's recommendation too. We also noted that in response to recommendation 2, you stated that your ministry had presented a proposal for a comprehensive development plan to the Cabinet in August of 2024. My first question really to you is whether the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development accepts the Auditor General's recommendation to work with other ministries to develop an overarching strategy for sustainable economic development.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And definitely the answer is yes. I think the reconciling position between that and there being essentially a blank response in the recommendation would be as a result of the deferral by the caucus. I mean, I do think that we should refine the response a little bit to actually make it clear that it was deferred by caucus. It didn't reach the cabinet level, but that's just splitting hairs a little bit. But we do accept the recommendation that there needs to be an overarching plan, and finance is probably best placed to carry that out, Mr. Chairman. And it is quite an effort, and it also involves quite an effort, not just on the part of the civil servants, but it also requires considerable effort and time devotion by ministers of a new government, their backbench supporters, to essentially what the exercise will entail is an agreement by a government as to what their priorities are, what is important to that government, what it would like to achieve, and the Ministry of Finance is quite pivotal in that we have probably the best agency under a ministry to assist with that, the Economics and Statistics Office to assist with that. So I think by virtue of that office alone, it puts finance in a driving seat to coordinate and spearhead the process. So we certainly accept the recommendation, and there's no disagreement with it.
And I think you said that you would be bringing that back to the caucus and the cabinet for consideration after the general elections in April. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. It's something that we should do. We obviously have the document ready that it could be represented again. So that's certainly an important aspect that we should do post 30th of April.
Thank you for that answer. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you is, what sort of data and consultations would be planned and needed to inform the strategy's development?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I said, I think in the previous answer, I think one of the key areas for consultation and ideas would have to come from honorable ministers themselves as to what their priorities are. We'd certainly, the approach that was envisaged to develop the plan also obviously spoke to reaching out to the private sector. So you certainly wanted to talk to the Chamber of Commerce, you wanted to talk to the Tourism Association, the financial services industries, etc. Obviously those are existing now. In terms of diversity, then we need to reach out to entities that are currently not one of those major four sectors to get their ideas as to what could be developed. Data, you'd want to speak to primarily the ESO for sure, as to data on expected population growth. You'd want to see what housing stock exists and what was likely to arise in the future. We'd want to speak to the Minister of Planning. For example, one of the mentions in the Auditor General's report was the undersea cable. Is that going to be a reality, as an example? Those are some of the areas that we would reach out to. If you bear with me a second, Mr. Chairman, I just glance at the note, that the approach that I was thinking of, and essentially those are the main areas that are the main associations, etc., that we would reach out to in terms of gathering data. We'd obviously want to see, comparisons with other jurisdictions and other sectors to see, what sort of success they may have had, particularly if you're venturing into a new area, to see how difficult it is and what the capital requirements are, the labor requirements, etc. I think those are some of the consultations and the data that we would need.
And when you get around to actually doing this NFS, who do you envisage within the Ministry of Finance would take the leading role in developing this strategy? I'm not looking for a person's name here, but maybe a department or whatever it is might be, or a certain position within the ministry that would be tasked with leading this process.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The approach, as I said, that I mentioned earlier about going to a caucus, the approach contained, a table, and it spoke to a steering committee being established, and the steering committee consisting of persons from the ESO, the Economics and Statistics Office, and the Ministry of Finance would be the key people on that. Mr. Chairman, there's obviously nothing wrong with others being co-opted into the steering committee, not just ESO and Finance.
Thank you, sir. Now I'd like to turn then to looking at the plans for economic diversification. I'll turn to Ms. Heather Bodden to lead that line of inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Jefferson. The government has highlighted priorities for economic diversification and strategic policy statements since 2018. The Auditor General stated that the Civil Service did not have a strategy or plan that sets out how it plans to achieve this. However, it has established some bodies and implemented several initiatives and policies to diversify the economy. Some of these have had a positive economic impact. And my question to the Financial Secretary is whether the planned overarching strategy for economic development will consider economic diversification.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Member Borden, and good afternoon, Ms. Borden. Definitely, Mr. Chairman. I mean, that's one of the key features of what that plan should achieve. And I think just to tie it in with the Auditor General's report, it mentions about, in the Auditor General's report, it mentions the interconnectedness of possible risks, for example, to the Cayman economy. So using the report as an illustration, it speaks to during the COVID crisis. The COVID crisis affected, for example, tourism quite badly, but the financial services sector was not affected as badly as tourism. And so what that obviously tells us is that the more sectors that we have to our economy, the more sectors that we have, we enhance the protectiveness of the economy to external risks, attacking the Cayman Islands, being subjected to those risks. It obviously helps us to be able to withstand those risks and the impacts of those risks. The plan definitely, Mr. Chairman, the plan definitely needs to include diversification. That's obviously critical. It's proven, Mr. Chairman, although the report mentions things like the special economic zone, diversification has proven to be quite elusive to governments now and in the past in terms of coming up with new areas. It's difficult, but the importance of it is there, and it needs to be pursued. So definitely the plan needs to include efforts to diversify.
Thank you, sir.
Turn now to the economic contribution from the tourism sector. I'll turn it, and Barbara will ask that line of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to our witness. The Auditor General's report states the government spent about $832 million in total supporting the tourism sector between 2018 and 2022. The tourism sector generated around $149 million in government revenues over the period. However, the Auditor General reported that the economic contribution of the tourism sector is unknown because the Economics and Statistics Office does not measure or report it separately. My question is, are there any plans for the Economics and Statistics Office to start measuring and monitoring the economic contribution from the tourism sector in order to support and inform government policy?
Thank you, Member Conley. Mr. Chairman, if I could just ask for a few seconds, I'd like to consult the Director of ESO.
Proceed.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for allowing the consultation. I'm advised by the Director of ESO that yes, there are plans to collect such data. They're obviously hoping to have information for quite a bit of 2025 and then a full year for 2026. And they would have to work very closely with the Department of Tourism in gathering that information.
Mr. Jefferson, I have to say I'm really pleased to hear that, because I know, we all talk about it, and we say tourism being the second pillar of the of the economy, and we do hear, have heard, some, at least a regional economist questioning, just how much of a contributor it is to the economy. And I think, as a country, and I think as a government, we need to finally get to the bottom of that and understand just really what it is contributing. I mean, it's an issue that I think would and could help inform this whole idea of expanding tourism infrastructure in Cayman. So I'm really happy to hear that, and I look forward to seeing some of the outputs and some of the results from the efforts to try and quantify it. So thank you very much for that. Okay, we're going to turn now to the economic performance and the updated United Nations Human Development Index data. I'll turn it over now to Mr. Joey Hu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Mr. Jefferson. The United Nations, the UN, Human Development Index, known as the HDI, is a measure of economic development. The Auditor General report notes that the Cayman Islands HDI in 2021 was 0.877, ranking it 34th amongst 191 countries. In the same year, the Cayman Islands had the highest HDI reported in the Caribbean. However, the government has not published updated HDI data since 2021. And my question to you is whether or not the Economic and Statistics Office plans to continue calculating and publishing the UN HDI data.
Again, Mr. Chairman, just let me consult, please.
Yes, we plan to continue with the HDI, but we just need actual data rather than estimated GDP. So we normally have to have at least a year lag. Because, for example, the data for last year, we just have 23 data now. That is not published yet. The actual calculation from the returns. So it normally would take like a 2-year lag. But we will publish 22 and 23. Yeah, we will work on it. Yeah, we just finished that report in December. That's the one we What does it mean? It measures some of the quality of life indicators, but it's just a few. But we need an important component called some aspect of GDP. The GDP per capita actually.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and apologies for the delay. I've just been advised by the Director of the ESO that yes, the ESO does actually plan to publish the 2022 and the 2023 HDI data, and it would do so this year. Yeah, do so this year. Mr. Chairman, I was also discussing, sorry, just as an add-on, discussing with the Director whether the HDI, the Human Development Index, was much the same as a quality of life index, which the ESO has actually published and is on its website. It's done, I think it's done one. It's done one of those such reports, and that was based on surveys of obviously persons in our community back in April 2024. They did another survey in probably November of 2024, and the results of that November 2024 is going to be published in early 2025. And so that comments on that quality of life index is fairly wide in encompassing. It talks about their access to health care. It talks about their cost of living, job opportunities. It talks about educational opportunities. So it is a general quality of life index that's actually been produced now or by the ESO.
Thank you for that, FS. I have to say I was really pleased. I found it really interesting reading that quality of life index report, and just try to help me understand really in terms of, are there other, is this based on the same sort of principles stuff that other countries would follow, so that the report and our index can be compared to other countries?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, the answer is it is roughly comparable. What I was told is that in countries other than Cayman, some of the advanced countries, they use, for example, a Gallup poll in carrying out that index, and Cayman, the ESO, would not have access to the exact same questions that were posed in that poll, but the questions that we asked locally in conducting the quality of life, we believe are roughly comparable. So it may not be 100% directly comparable, but we're satisfied that it is substantially comparable.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. I appreciate it very much. FS, that concludes our examination of you as a witness. Thank you for, as always, for the candid way you answer our questions and are forthcoming with information. I think it makes our work a lot easier to be able to get through everything that we do, and I'm really grateful for that. So you feel free now to take your place, usual place here in the chamber.
Okay.
And thanks also to the Director of the ESO for his assistance today as well. It's been very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to honorable members.
Okay, our final witness for today is Mr. Eric Bush, who is the Chief Officer of the Ministry of Planning, Agriculture, Housing, Infrastructure, Transport and Development. Mr. Bush, welcome back, sir. And thank you for being here. We're a bit ahead of ourselves this afternoon in this hearing, so I appreciate your getting back here a bit earlier as well. So hopefully we can get things concluded well ahead of our planned time this afternoon. So, Mr. Bush, sustainable economic development is an important issue, and the Auditor General published her report about the government's approach to sustainable economic development on the 21st of November, 2024. Her report states that construction and real estate sector is the third highest contributor to the economy in terms of GDP. We heard from the Financial Secretary about the government's overall strategic direction for economic development and diversification. We now want to follow up on some issues that are specific to the construction sector. The Auditor General made recommendation 2 to Ministry of Planning, Agriculture, Housing, Infrastructure, Transport and Development. However, it is unclear whether your ministry accepted the recommendation, and committee members will want to ask you about this. So I will turn the first part of our question will focus on the National Development Plan, and I'm going to turn to Mr. Joey Hugh to lead that questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, good afternoon, Chief Officer Bush. The government does not have an up-to-date National Development Plan, or NDP. This contravenes the National Development Planning, or the Development and Planning Act 2021 revision, which requires the government to update the development plan every 5 years. In the absence of a National Development Plan, the physical development and overall use of land in the Cayman Islands is disjointed and ad hoc. In September 2023, the Central Planning Authority approved the Project Delivery Plan for the NDP, and the Project Delivery Plan sets a target for completing the plan in the last quarter of 2024. And in May 2024, your ministry started consulting the plan known as Plan Cayman, one I might be a little familiar with. The PAC wishes to, or I would like to ask if you would be able to update the Public Accounts Committee on whether the ministry's previous target of completing the National Development Plan in the last quarter of 2024 was met. I would go on to say that if it is yes, I'd ask, will you be publishing it, and what would the next steps be, and if it is not, then why was the target not met, and ask for a revised date and assurances that the ministry's new target to complete the National Development Plan will be met. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members. Thank you for the question. Again, my name is Eric Bush, Chief Officer for the Ministry of Planning, Agriculture, Housing, Infrastructure, Transport and Development. Quick answer is no. We have not met the target. The target was ambitious, to say the least. But Mr. Chairman, if I could just give a bit more of a fulsome answer, if I could have a little latitude, just to give some context of the beast that we are trying to slay. As correctly and appropriately identified in the report, the National Development Plan was the last iteration that we're currently working under from 1997. And the current legislation does require it to be reviewed and updated every 5 years. So in 2018 to 2021, under the stewardship of Honourable Mr. Hugh, when he was Minister of Planning, the National Planning Framework document was drafted and made available to the public in late 2018, early 2019. In September 2021, the National Development Plan presentation and discussion with ministers to discuss the options for proceeding with the project. In April 22, the CPA met to discuss the development plan project, the National Development Plan Framework, and the draft 7 Mile Beach planning area. In August 2022, the final draft of the National Planning Framework document was considered by the CPA at their meeting, and the authority advised that the national planning framework was acceptable to them. It's important to understand that whilst the Ministry and the Ministry of Planning and the Department of Planning is heavily involved, the legal authority of this process lay with the Central Planning Authority. We all have a part to play, but they are the owners. In September 22, the National Planning Framework document was formally submitted to the Honourable Minister of Planning, J.E. Banks, for onward transmission to Cabinet. In February 23, minor corrections were made to the National Planning Framework document. And in July 2023, the Development Plan Project Team was formed. I was the chair, along with the Ministry of Sustainability and Climate Resiliency, and supported by the Department of Planning. This was in full agreement with the Central Planning Authority. Then in September 23, the CPA met again to discuss the delivery plan and process of the National Development Planning, And in January 24, the CPA met to discuss the first draft of the planning statement. In February, the Development Control Board met to discuss the plan and the statement. All this to say, Mr. Chairman, it required a lot of consultation. There's a lot of players. It affects the entire country. And then in April, Cabinet approved the publication of the Central Planning Authority's statement and started off a 60-day public consultation process. Now, from May to August of last year, the CPA, assisted by the Ministry and the Department, held 6 public town hall meetings, a virtual meeting, numerous press releases. All the public town hall meetings, were broadcast via Radio Cayman, and all of this was to fully explain the process and what the framework looked to achieve, and the planning statement itself. Out of that, we received 224 responses via forms and 33 written forms. However, in those numbers, there were over 2,500 individual comments received. After that, between August and September, the Department of Planning, in consultation with the CPE, reviewed the feedback and drafted written responses, and it's fair to say amended the document accordingly. Now, as prescribed, the document now is, from the Central Planning Authority's perspective, and the Department of Planning is in good form, having taken into account the over 2,500 responses. Now, where it is that we need to form a development plan tribunal. And the Cabinet is in the process of considering the recommendations of who should sit on that tribunal. Once the tribunal is created by Cabinet, then they will be asked to review, again, all of the comments, what the department, the CPA, have done with it, and the statement itself. Once the tribunal approves or recommends additional changes, then if approval is given, then it goes to the minister. The minister then takes it to his cabinet. If Cabinet approves, then the statement goes to Parliament. And it's for Parliament then to openly debate it and approve or otherwise. And if it is approved, that is when we have the planning statement. If it is approved in its main current state, that then will create incremental areas of planning development that will essentially cuts the islands up into 11 area plans. and it's envisaged that those area plans will be reviewed annually every 5 years, and not all 11 at the same time. So 2 to 3 every year to ensure we remain what we get and remain compliant with the legislation. So all that to say, Mr. Chairman, I think setting a target for ourselves to final quarter of 2024 was a bit ambitious. We have done a lot of work. I'm proud of the work that's been done by everybody, but there's still quite a bit more to do. Hope that answers the question, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, through you, thank the Chief Officer for that detailed response. One clarification I'd like to get, or a quick question, is the tribunal, is that in the law as well, or was that a decision made by the CPA?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'm advised that it is in legislation, yes, sir, as a requirement.
If there's no other questions, Mr. Chairman, I'll move on to the strategy for construction sector.
I did just want to ask one question. You mentioned that you've now divided it up into 11 sections for review. I think is there any explain the reasons for going from 5 to 11?
At the risk of opening up a whole can of worms, Mr. Chairman, I'm advised that it's essentially taking into account the cultural and social differences of some communities, and the 5 that were previously had. We wanted to become more involved in, as an example, parts of Georgetown. You have residential, and some now is becoming far more commercial or even resort-like. So Georgetown is now, if you will, for the lack of a better term, carved up or segregated to whereby a part of it is acknowledged to be more resort or or hotel even, and some remain low-density residential. Hopefully that helps.
Okay, I understand. And then those 11 areas, does this plan then include Kimmebrack and Little Cayman?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. You can continue, Mr. Q.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you, and I'll move on then to strategy for the construction sector. Mr. Chairman, through you, we are pleased to note that the significant economic contribution from the construction and real estate sector from 2018 to 2022, the construction and real estate sector was the 3rd highest contributor to the economy in terms of gross domestic product, or the GDP. Over the same period, it employed the most people, averaging 6,600 annually, or 14% of the average total labor workforce. We also note that about 40% of these were Caymanian. In the Auditor General's report, she states that your ministry has yet to develop a strategy for the construction sector and recommended that you develop one. As mentioned by the chairman earlier, it is unclear if you have accepted this recommendation. And so the committee would like to confirm whether the ministry accepted the Auditor General's recommendations to develop a strategy for the construction sector. And of course, if the recommendation was accepted, when would the ministry finalize the strategy? And if it was not accepted, your reasons for not accepting them.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the question. The as noted, construction, development, and real estate is the third pillar of the Cayman Islands economy. Does Cayman need to look at diversification? Absolutely. Does Cayman need to look to strengthen its any major economic pillar? Yes. Who's to do it and how it's done, I think is largely up to debate, and that's really a political conversation to have, not one for a civil servant or the civil service. It is our role to ensure that the services provided by all the departments within the government that regulate and facilitate the development, transfer of lands, and building itself, we need to make sure that those services are provided at a world-class level. I did mention in my response that we have commissioned a organizational review of the Department of Planning and Building Control by, again, PricewaterhouseCoopers after a competitive bid process, where we asked them to really critically look at the Department of Building Control to determine if it is still best suited to provide services that the private sector could provide. And what I mean by that is, in large part, the Department of Planning and Building Control have been given the same resources effectively, or been able to attract the resources, even if they've been given more budget, the same resources that they've had since 2008. And as the Auditor General's report illustrates, even from 2018 to 2022, the amount of development and construction has boomed since then, but yet we're still having to work and facilitate plan reviews, building inspections, etc., with same amount of human resources. So the draft final report, which was issued in December 2024 to the ministry and is yet to be considered by caucus, looks at that critically and provides recommendations towards outsourcing parts of building control and planning. But it's also, Mr. Chairman, a chicken and egg scenario. What I mean by that, and the previous question around the National Development Plan, we have to have a completed and updated National Development Plan before we even look to create a strategy around construction and development, because, and far be it for me to say, further unlock the development and planning of the Cayman Islands without, as the Auditor General says, without having a clear understanding of how you want the country to be developed. So, do I believe that a strategy should be formed? Yes. How, who, and when, I think is a political decision, sir. I hope that helps.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I thank the Chief Officer for that answer and look forward to the findings in that report. Through you, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to follow up on something that just passed my mind as we were speaking earlier with the previous witness about the overarching economic development plan, and now talking about construction and, you know, who controls or how do we plan and monitor and control what is largely known as the third industry in the Cayman Islands. And then we think about the role that the Ministry of Finance would play in things such as incentives or helping to develop industries or providing, even just providing guidance on ways to on ways to create efficiencies, et cetera, in different areas. And we think about the cost of housing in Cayman, in particular for our people. Has there been any discussions or coordination between the Ministry of Finance and your ministry around what role does the planning department and the building control unit play in the cost of housing in the Cayman Islands, or what role can it play in reducing the cost of housing in the Cayman Islands?
Through you, Mr. Chair, and thank the member again for the question. I do believe that if that is the intent, there is opportunity to actively look at the building code, actively look at what is at how and where houses are built. In fact, we are in the, I guess it's fair to say, final stages of updating the building code now. We're the current building code that's being used is from 2012, if memory serves me correctly, and we're looking to adopt either the 2021 or 2024, and they're quite similar in outcome. But the main components of that have the potential to reduce cost is, and if this is approved, would be the allowance of other technology material to be used for walls, as an example. So we wouldn't be required for homes to use concrete blocks and cement, but it could use light frame steel with appropriate cladding to ensure that it still meets the Category 3 or higher strengthening and protection from hurricanes and winds. But we estimate that it could have as much of as a 20-25% reduction in building costs. In terms of collaboration, I'll be the first to put his hand up and say we don't do enough of it in terms of having that strategic approach to diversifying or even strengthening the pillars. I think we can, and this report, I think, does a fantastic job of highlighting that, and I hope a lot of the recommendations bring forth a lot of positive change. Mr. Chairman, yourself and the member and others would be aware that the previous government did set up an entity that looked to essentially look at other areas of diversifying the economy. But as identified in the report, this was discontinued in the last 2 years. So.
Thank you. Want to now turn our attention to the critical success factors in the construction industry. The report of the Auditor General said that your ministry has not identified critical success factors for the construction and real estate sector. Her report states that several stakeholders identified delays in reviewing planning applications and completing building inspections as challenges that the sector faces. We note from your response to recommendation 1 in the Auditor General's report that the ministry is conducting an organizational review. Your response also states that this review is likely to recommend reforming the planning department and outsourcing the functions currently undertaken by the building control unit. Can you share with us what your views are on appropriate critical success factors for the construction industry?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that question. I guess quite simply to ensure that the building codes and building legislation is followed, and that applications both for plan reviews, area development plans, and inspections are done as efficiently and effectively as possible. In a nutshell, I think that's what the critical success factors are of this function.
Do you believe that the ministry has the information and the frameworks that are needed to measure and report on these critical success factors?
The ministry has access to the Department of Planning's database, and that says how many applications come in. That tells us what happens in terms of is it just reviewed, denied, or approved? Is it sent back for more information? All of those touch points are recorded. Do we use those and analyze those? No, we do not. In terms of information also that's gathered when a project is approved and construction is allowed to start, we know the date in which the construction starts, and that's given for a period of time. So if that expires, there's no obligation to start the project, but they have the allowance of doing so. And then if a project is completed, then a certificate of occupancy is provided. So we would know the date in which the certificate of occupancy is provided. So all of the information is there. And as I said before, the success factors are ensuring that we are providing all of those services as efficiently and as effectively as we can, and meeting some levels of standards. But I don't think, Mr. Chairman, we're there yet, because I think there's a more efficient way in which we can offer the service, or perhaps outsource the service.
And I'd like you to share your views with us on the reported delays in reviewing planning applications and completing building inspections, and really the reasons for them, because we hear these complaints and of significant delays within the planning, within there with getting these things, applications approved and completing building inspections.
Yes, sir. I think there is scope for improvement, both in the planning review and consultation and ultimate approval through the plans review and approval, as well as the inspections of the projects as they're built. I think there's scope to deploy artificial intelligence. I think there's scope to rely more on the private sector to pick up these things. I mean, in large part, whilst some areas are allowed by law to be done by the private sector, in large part the private sector still hasn't picked this up and created its own industry. And I think that's largely due to the fact that the government is still mainly doing it. But if the government politically makes the decision that we are going to reduce the amount of services that the government can do, but allow the private sector to do this, it is really hoped, just like architectural design, that the private sector picks this up and starts to create an industry of plan reviews and of building inspections. And that's where we hope that the innovation will really be catapulted and leveraged.
When do you plan to complete the organizational review that you spoke about?
Yes, sir. The PricewaterhouseCoopers did provide the report to us in December, so we are awaiting a spot in caucus, and then continuation on to cabinet.
And do you think, does the report actually address the issues that you've identified?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, that's good to know. So having presented it, do you have any sort of estimated time frame when it will become public document or as such?
Mr. Chairman, I could say as soon as possible, sir. Sorry.
Okay, let's move on now to the use of data. And for that, I'm going to turn to Ms. Heather Bodden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Bush, CEO Bush. The Auditor General's report states that between 2018 and 2022, about 4,000 construction projects were approved with an annual value ranging from 530 million to 990 million. However, it is my understanding your ministry does not track the number of project approvals that result in completed projects. Therefore, it is unclear how many of these planned projects have been completed. Can the CO say if plans to start tracking the number of project approvals that result in completed projects, and how the ministry does plan to use data to inform the short, medium, and long-term planning?
Mr. Chairman, through you, thank you for that question. The ministry itself does not collate the information, but I think it's absolutely fair to say that it is available at the department level. But how we need to use that in terms of strategic thinking, personally, I believe that comes after we complete the National Development Plan framework and the planning statement and start finalizing the area plans. And so once we understand what the communities want built in their areas, and then overlaying that or coupling that side by side with economic diversification for development, I think that it's at that time. But right now, where we are, we do collect the information. We know when a project starts. We know when a project is finished. We know the approximate value of it. We know where it is. But as identified in the report, the National Development Plan right now is our priority.
Thank you, CEO. Also, as we're aware that there are some issues with regards to persons building homes and then turning their property into commercial, can the CO say if persons given approval to construct a home understands that's what it's for, and the same for commercial, is it made clear to the persons that's receiving approval that there's a difference? If you're building a home, that's what it's for. If it's commercial, that's what it's for.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I have to say absolutely, simply because in the application process, the use of the structure is explicit. I mean, there's a different process for commercial versus residential. There's different requirements for commercial depending on what trade the building is going to be used for. There's different requirements for that per the building code. So it's absolutely clear, just from the applicant's standpoint. So once the approval, if and once the approval is given, it's given based on the application itself.
Thank you, sir.
Questions from any other members of the committee? If not, then Mr. Bush, thank you very much for your testimony here today. Thanks for being here. I know you featured in both of these investigations today, sessions. So I thank you for a candid way in which you've answered questions as well. And, this is going to conclude the session of the Public Accounts Committee this afternoon. So thank you both for being here and sharing with us.
Thank you, sir. Thank you to everybody.
So thanks to everyone for your presence today. And I think this has got to be a record for us, you know that. We actually finished ahead of time. Started a little bit late and got finished ahead of time. So congratulations and thanks to everyone for your diligence and for helping us to get through this session of the Public Accounts Committee. I can't let the occasion pass without acknowledging the Auditor General and the work that she has done over the last, 3.5, nearly 4 years that we've all been together as a team working and completing the work of the Public Accounts Committee. As members know, Auditor General resigned last year, and her final day of work, I believe, is the 28th. I should be officially leaving her post on the 28th of February. So I think it's only right that we, as a committee who have worked so diligently with her these past 4 years, acknowledge the work that she has done and her contribution to keeping government accountable and helping to improve the operations of government and ensuring that the government itself delivers the services and that things are delivered in such a way that there is value there for the country in all that she does. I've not seen her shy away from any of the contentious or difficult things that needed to be done in her work. And Sue, I just wanted, on behalf of the Public Accounts Committee, to say thank you for your work and for your commitment to the role which you have played. You came in 2015, am I right? 16. So she has been here for 9 years, and you've really made a positive effect on, I think, on good governance and the operation of government itself. And so I thank you for that. I want to wish you, on behalf of us all the very best for the future and whatever work or wherever your feet take you when you leave here. You go with our prayers and best wishes. And again, I thank you for that and for your presence.
I need the right to reply. I am truly grateful to this Public Accounts Committee and the two before it, because I've had the pleasure of working across 3 administrations now. And it's been really cheering and delightful that each Public Accounts Committee has been so supportive of the work of our office, and that all of the members of the committee have acted in an apolitical way, which is what is expected and required of a Public Accounts Committee. And that's been really pleasing. It's been an absolute pleasure and privilege. All I want to do is make things better. Our office's vision is about helping the public spend their money wisely, spending public money wisely. And I hope our work contributes to that. But the work is not mine, it is that of those in the office, and I have the best team. So thank you, and thank you to the committee for thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your kind words, and the committee for all your hard work. We certainly keep you busy.
Thank you, Auditor General. So, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this sitting of the Public Accounts Committee. And I have to say, it is unquestionably the last public hearing that we will host as this term comes to an end in April, knowing that the Parliament will be dissolved on March 1st. That's, just a little over 5 weeks away for us. So, it's been a pleasure working with all of you for these 3.5, almost 4 years. And see you on the other side. Good evening, everyone. Thanks.